Hello, everybody, and welcome to another live stream. Today, we are very glad to have Sonia Frontera, which is a lawyer, trainer, and an author, empowerment trainer, right, Sonia?
That's right.
And today, we're gonna be talking about domestic abuse and how to prevent it, which is a tricky question, and we're gonna be talking about it. But Sonia, tell me, the first question today is, what is domestic abuse?
Domestic abuse is when one partner tries to exert power and control over the other partner. And they can do that through a number of different ways. And
Okay.
again, let me emphasize it's about patterns of behaviors, right? And they can range a number of different behaviors. And we tend to think about domestic abuse as strictly physical violence. And that's why I prefer the term partner abuse. In addition to physical violence, which is really obviously and unmistakably partner abuse, it can consist of other behaviors that are designed to control you, to intimidate you, and to exert power over you. For example, most partner abuse centers around isolating the victim from the support
Yes.
systems, from family and friends. And so that way that the victim is unable to reach out for help and is dependent on the abuser. It can be financial abuse. It can be also verbal. It can be psychological. It can be spiritual, and it can be sexual. So we can unpack all this as we go along. But that in general is the most common types of domestic abuse.
It's mostly about how you control your partner on the relationship. How often does domestic abuse happen?
It is very common. The statistics show that 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men suffer domestic abuse at least once in their lifetime. And that's what the statistics show. But considering that a lot of people do not report abuse and that many people don't even realize that they find themselves in abusive relationships, I think the number could very well be much higher than that.
You told me that it doesn't always involve violence. What does it involve besides violence? How can we see that we are under a domestic abuse relationship?
It can be sometimes tricky to know that you find yourself in an abusive relationship because some of the behaviors that constitute partner abuse can be normalized, right? We see them not only as normal, but sometimes even as desirable. For example,
Even
um,
as a society, we normalize things, huh?
we do. For example, and we can say, and we have a lot of listeners. And by the way, thanks for everyone who is with us today.
Yes,
Um,
thank you.
Yes, thanks for joining us, and to Hola Doctor for bringing this topic to your viewers' attention. Um, we normalize certain behaviors, and for example, I know that your demographic tends to have a lot of Hispanic viewers and followers. And for example, in our culture, we see jealousy. The man who is jealous is because he loves you, because that's a way of expressing caring, right? So we tend to see that if somebody is excessively jealous, we don't see it as possibly trying to control us. We see it as someone who wants to love us, who is so loving and so into you that he wants to be with you every second, every moment, know your whereabouts, when in fact that could be a cover up for trying to control your whereabouts, not letting you be yourself and do what you wish to do and what you
Yes.
have the right to do.
Yes, that's one of the misconceptions that we have as a, but basically for Hispanics, the Hispanic community, the biggest misconception that we have is that domestic abuse is violence. If they hit you, that's domestic abuse. That's our how we see it. And there's more to that. There's you tell me.
I mean, it's one of the things, and even domestic abuse, like being hit, is normalized, right?
Yes.
It's something that in certain circles can be seen as something that is passed down. That my father did it, and that is okay. That's how men and women relate to one another. And in fact, I have an example for a friend of mine in Mexico. He told me that there was a man beating up his partner in public, and they jumped in to intervene, and the woman's like, leave him alone, he knows what he's doing. So
What?
it's like sometimes, yes, so sometimes we are led to believe that that's part of the discipline or the way we relate. And in fact, if you are familiar with the rule of thumb, that came from, I believe, England, where a man was allowed to discipline his wife, hitting her with a stick no thicker than his thumb. So, if we have seen in different parts of our history where disciplining your wife, your spouse physically has been condoned.
Yes, that's a very bad situation. What is it so hard to detect it? Domestic abuse, or the beginnings of domestic abuse, if you can say that.
Well, because it can be very subtle, right?
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's not necessarily violence. It can be things like, and I'm going to give you an example because this is something that I didn't realize. The most common and one of the most powerful forms of partner abuse is financial. Did you know that?
By how you mean by how if I earn more money than her, or she earns more money than me?
No, let me explain. And for example, and tying into your question about how is it so hard to detect? And for example, financial abuse is when one partner exerts financial control. For example, it can be by taking care solely of the finances, right? Having sole access to all accounts, all the assets are in their names. The liability can be in both names, so they're both responsible for paying the debts, but the one partner has sole control over all the accounts, knows where the money is, hides assets, prevents the partner from having a job or getting an education or keeping a job by interfering with her ability to work, for example, by showing up at work and create, disturbances at work, or constantly calling so that the supervisors, get upset and this person gets in trouble and potentially fired, right? So that's a form of financial abuse, limiting your access to money or the ability to earn it. It could be damaging your credit, for instance, taking credit in your name without you even knowing about it. So there's many ways, many manifestations of financial abuse, but the bottom line is that it leads the partner who is being abused completely dependent on the abuser for survival. And it makes it very difficult to leave, and sometimes hard to know, because for instance, and again, in some cultures, we tend to think that men should be in charge of finances. Men know about numbers and women don't, right? These are some old-fashioned notions that sometimes we buy into. And we also have that where, for example, a man says, my wife doesn't have to work outside of the home, right?
Yes.
Or when they're courting, you're my princess, you're my queen, I'll take care of you. You never have to work outside of the home. And then she finds herself with no access to money, being on an allowance, having to tell the spouse how I spent the money or where the money went, or being limited as to how she can run the household. So these are ways in which this manifests.
This topic of financial domestic abuse brings me back to Hispanic moms. You know how they put her self-care topics, her priorities at last. First, their kids, and then the partner, and herself put at last.
Right. And women, we tend to do that. We're kind of conditioned to be doing that. And let me point out that, and we see it a lot in the movies, how many movies and how many series start with the husband dying and then the woman finding out that he made some really bad investments and they're totally broke, right?
Yes.
How many shows start that way? My favorite, The Grand Hotel. I don't know if you've seen it on Netflix.
I've seen it, yeah.
Yes, I mean, how does it start? And then you have the daughter has to marry this monster who is abusive, by the way, and even rapes her in the movie, in the show. So she finds herself tied to this man who's abusive because they're destitute, and he's the one controlling the finances. He's the one who's running the hotel. So she turns completely subservient to this human being. And by the way, let me point out, if anyone who is listening or watching is interested in learning more about financial abuse, I did a program for Abacus Wealth, for Abacus Academy, that talks in detail about financial abuse, if anyone is interested in learning more about it.
Yes, perfect. That's amazing. Financial abuse, it's a really good topic that I didn't know, to be honest. But I want to take this opportunity to point out that, for example, with this domestic abuse relationship, if the time goes by, the woman or the man tends to, how do you say, the opposite, to empower themselves, you know? How does that happen?
Well, you have someone, the abuser is chipping away at your self-worth, and that is the purpose of all these behaviors, right? To intimidate you, to make you feel fear, and to shrivel up, to be left alone, feeling isolated and feeling disempowered. You lose your self-confidence. You're being subjected very often to little digs. You know, it can be big physical blow-ups, but it can also be death by 1,000 cuts when you have somebody who's constantly criticizing you, putting you down, right? Saying disparaging things to you about you or your family and your friends. So this is the kind of thing that erodes your self-esteem over time, and that eventually might escalate into physical violence. Even where the abuse can start out as being more subtle or more psychological and not physical, it is over time, it runs the very high risk of escalating into physical violence.
Okay, so how can we see we are in a domestic abuse relationship, and what can we do after we notice that we are in this situation?
I mean, you have to start looking for those signs, right? And I like to say this because there's so many different possible behaviors that the whole Encyclopedia Britannica could not contain, because these abusers are very crafty at what they do, and it can be a number of different ways or combinations.
Tends to be shaped, huh?
Yeah, it can be any of many different ways. But the bottom line, and I say, we all have the answers within, right? We're wiser than we give ourselves credit for. And I say, here's a non-technical test for you. Does your partner make you feel bad about yourself? Does your partner's behaviors make you feel bad about yourself? What is your intuition telling you? Right? And listen to your intuition and get help. There's so much help available out there, and it is confidential. It is free. And you can talk to a counselor, and the counselor can help you ascertain if you are in an abusive relationship and can help you create a plan to protect yourself, and if necessary, leave the relationship safely.
That's a very good question. If I'm happy with the relationship that I have right now, but why is it so hard for some people to leave that relationship, to just cut out and cut for good, you know?
It is very difficult to break away from an abusive relationship, and statistics show that it can take a victim up to 7 attempts to get out, and that's for many different reasons.
Seven to what?
7 times. 7 times.
Oh, 7 tries, like tries?
Yeah, 7 times, like you leave 7 times and he keeps bringing you back in, right? And it can be for a number of different reasons. And one of the most powerful ones is the fear, right? The fear factor of the threats. Sometimes the abuser, when you decide to leave, threatens you with physical violence. If you leave me, I will kill you or your children or your family. So there's that fear of harm, especially where there has been violence, right? I mean, this person is perfectly capable of acting on it, right? So there's that fear factor, the intimidation factor. Another factor is that sometimes the victims don't have the support of friends and family, right? They don't feel like they have the support to get out. They might depend financially or emotionally on the abuser, right? So it's hard to break that bond. And it's really difficult because also the abusers tend to be charming. If he's not making threats, he could very well be feeling very contrite, which is part of the cycle of violence, where they say, oh, I'm so sorry, I'll never do it again. And they make you all kinds of promises that they're going to change. So you are hoping, because typically abusers are not 100% monsters. They can be very loving. They can be very caring. And the victim gets attached to the loving person they wish he would be all the time. But that is not sustainable over time. So it is that love and fear dynamic that keeps on victims afraid to leave or hoping, right, that the partner will become the loving companion that they're wishing for, and that he can be at times.
Or that they met before and they change.
Right. And that's something that is very common in abusive relationships. Right? Yes. Right. Because they suck you in. It's like being very romantic and very loving and very intense. Right.
And they changed all of a sudden.
Right. It's especially when they think they have you. For example, when you're pregnant or after you get married and they think now she's not going to divorce me. The family is not going to let her. The church is not going to let her. And now they can show their true colors, and the victim is stuck.
You brought a very good point, Sonia, that I want to point out, which is support from family and friends. But how from the outside, how can we interfere on that relationship? How come if my sister or my brother or a friend, how can I interfere or, get in help on that situation?
First of all, you need to identify the signs. You need to know. You need to know whether someone you love is in an abusive relationship. And so you need to be on the lookout. For example, when the other person tends to withdraw from you, let's say your sister is very close to you and you do all things together, all of a sudden she gets married and she doesn't come to family events anymore, or she cuts the conversation short, or she's not as engaged, right? And you might not realize that this person might be hurting because, you don't know what's going on in their relationship. The partner could very well be making disparaging remarks, or, being with the family results in having blowups when they get back home, right? So you need to look for that change in personality if they look nervous around the partner or uneasy. If they look depressed or anxious. So it is those personality changes that might lead you to to suspect that there might be. And again, there could be physical manifestations. You could be seeing bruises, right? Or cuts or evidence that there might have been some kind of assault. So when you think someone is being abused, do not confront them. Just open up to communication. Let them know that you're concerned, that you care, that you're listening without judgment, without giving advice, because very often people tell them, I wouldn't be putting up with this, right? Everybody has the answers to everybody else's problems except for their own, right?
Know.
So
do you suggest to be persistent on those, on that?
I'm very, very affirming that you should never give up on them. And you will see that your friends, advice. Right, don't give up on them, because, you see them going back and you're like, she's asking for it.
Yeah.
People get frustrated, or they think they like it. I have heard this one. She must like it. Right. And that is so insidious. Nobody likes to be mistreated. No. Nobody likes to be abused. And I love this Spanish expression, solo la cuchara sabe lo que se menea en la olla. Right? Only the spoon knows what stirs in the pot. You really don't know what's happening. You might think that he's a good guy because that's the front he's putting before you. And she might be erratic because the abuse, the constant being berated is taking a toll on their personality and their psyche. So listen without judgment, right? Offer your unconditional support. Offer to help, and just open the lines of communication. Don't tell them what to do. Don't tell them what you would do if it were you, because it's not you. Just be supportive. be supportive, and offer them resources too. If you think they're being abused, you can give them the information about your local domestic violence organization. You can offer to go to them if they need to go to the police or talk to a lawyer, go to an appointment with a counselor. Be there for them, because that's going to make a huge difference, because victims feel alone and unsupported and at the mercy of their abuser. So be a friend.
I really like that advice. Don't give up on them.
Never.
Now the question that it's on the topic, which I know you hate, like if it's a solution just to eat apple and then be good, right? How can we prevent it?
You know, and that's a very tricky question, right? And I had on other interviews, like, how come there's still domestic abuse when there's all this awareness, right? All these awareness programs,
and all the sinful out there.
Yeah, but again, what do we consider to be domestic violence awareness? Giving us the statistics of what a great problem it is. It is. So where do you go from there? And preventing abuse is something that stems from social change, right? Yes. An abuser is responsible for his or her behaviors, and that's where the responsibility lies, right? They are choosing to act towards their partners in these unhealthy ways. So I really want to avoid any kind of inference that the victim has any control over the partner's behaviors, right? Especially when the partner would say, "You made me do it. I have to hit you because if you only shut up, right? You made me do it," right? So prevention is not something that the victim does. I highly recommend that anyone who is in a relationship be familiar with the signs, because the red flags are very, very similar to the signs of domestic abuse in a relationship can subtly manifest early on. So be on the lookout for anyone who complains about their other partners, who doesn't accept responsibility for what went wrong in other relationships, people who are always criticizing and putting down the opposite sex, having double standards, and acting in intimidating ways or controlling ways, excessively jealous. And one thing that is very common in our culture is that we tend to see that intensity, right? That's being so into, right? Oh my God, this is like you're flying high. But pay attention to see if any of the other signs are present, right? So that's what someone can do before they get into the abuse stage. Just be on the lookout for those signs early on. And as a society, I think it's important for parents to be role models to their children, because research shows that abusers are the children of abusers. Those are behaviors that they learned at home, and that also get reinforced in society, in music, or pop culture, the movies that normalize these behaviors, as opposed to making them absolutely abhorrent things that should not be tolerated.
Yes, it's mostly a problem as a society that we have. If you see these red flags, most relationships tend to seek counseling or professional advice. Do you suggest this?
No, and let me explain why.
Okay.
When it comes, if you think you are in this sort of situation, go to a domestic violence counselor as opposed to couples counseling.
Most people search for that, huh?
Right. If you suspect there's abuse, right, not a good thing. And the experts would tell you that very often the abuse it goes over the head of the therapist sometimes. And I can tell you from personal experience, whether it's your priest or a therapist, the abuser tends to be bamboozle the therapist, downplay the abuse, make the other person look like they're crazy. And so it's ineffective, and it can be more harmful to the victim to go through couples counseling. So the first step should always be going to a domestic violence organization who is familiar with the signs, who's familiar with the behaviors and what to do about it.
Perfect. Thank you, Sonia. Let's talk about finally, about you, your seminars, your books. What are you most looking for on these people to get out of it?
I want people to know that they can create the happiness. First of all, my tagline is awaken, imagine, and create.
Perfect.
Awaken to these thought and behavior patterns, right, that get you into trouble, that lead to your unhappiness and your dissatisfaction in your life. And you have the power to create your life. You envision it, you imagine it, and then you create it. And for people who are in relationships that are unhappy, I have published 2 books. My first one is Solve the Divorce Dilemma. Do you keep your husband or do you post them on Craigslist?
You post them on Craigslist.
Right. To help people, to help, that it's for women. And it's to help them make that difficult decision, whether or not to stay or end a marriage that is unhappy. And my second book is Relationship Solutions, Effective Strategies to Heal Your Heart and Create the Happiness You Deserve. And that is a gender neutral book. And both books aim to help people develop that awareness of their thinking patterns, how they got into these unhappy situations, so that they can understand where they came from, so they can make some changes that are positive and create a satisfying life, whether they stay in the relationship or they end it. Because we can create our lives. It's really up to us. It's not up to our partners to create our happiness, and we're not responsible for. It's really up to us. We really need to own that responsibility and take charge of our lives. And I also I published 2 booklets. They are about domestic abuse, Stop the Hurt, the truth about domestic violence that everyone needs to know, as well as its Spanish version, Por fin Abuso. And for our listeners, I'm going to make it free on Amazon for the next 2 days. So we can make it free on March 8th and 9th. So we can nice. Share that. We can share that link later. I will share it with you, Irving, and we can put it on Facebook and LinkedIn.
Yes, perfect. We're gonna just search for Sonia Frontera on Amazon, and we're also gonna be sharing the link on the comments. Let's finally go to the some questions. I think we have time for 2 questions, really quick.
Okay, let's do it.
The first one is. So I understand the signs of domestic violence, but where or who can you reach out to seek for help for victims? Most people think that those acts of violence are normal or a sign of that they care.
I highly recommend you.
How do you seek for victims?
I think the first step, my go-to resource is the National Domestic Violence Hotline, and you can find them at www.thehotline.org. And there they have counselors 24/7 available for chats. They can help you in any way. And also they have a directory of resources. So you can tap into the local resources where you live, because ultimately they can help you, but you might need assistance from your local agency. So they have links to resources all over the country. So that would be the first step.
Perfect. And the other question, which is really good, how does a male explain that he's in a domestic abuse relationship? Because something that they don't want to talk about it, right? It's kind of like what do you say?
Embarrassing.
We'll say
emasculating.
Embarrassing. Yes.
Right. And this is nothing to be ashamed of. Again, it's a responsibility of the abuser, not of the victim. So reach out to the hotline, thehotline.org. They can help you as well.
Is it pretty often that the males gets abused? You told me this the data before, right?
It's 1 in 7.
Oh my God, it's pretty
1 in
often.
7 men, and I have seen it, and it's very debilitating, especially to the self-esteem, because men don't see them. They see themselves as strong, and having your partner abuse you is it's just as debilitating for men as it is for women. And it should be taken seriously because you deserve to be in a respectful relationship. So reach out for help.
Perfect. Thank you, Sonia. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your advice. You can search for Sonia. You have a website, right? What is your
Yes.
website, Sonia?
It is soniafrontera.com.
And they can reach you out for you for legal help or anything, right?
My law office, it's a separate website, is www.fronteralaw.com.
Perfect. Any last advice you want to give, Sonia?
If you are hurting in your relationship, get help. Your safety is important. You deserve to be happy, and you're responsible for creating the happiness you deserve. Get support and get free and create the life you deserve because you deserve to be happy.
Perfect. I like it. Thank you so much, Sonia, again. And thank you to the viewers that came to the live stream. And make sure you follow All Out Tour on Facebook and Instagram, on YouTube. YouTube also. We put out a lot of stuff on YouTube. And contact us, comment, and share